Thanks so much, Bob and Lisa. Really appreciate your time today and for sharing your insight with all of us. I'm Jennifer Kaminsky, Director of Outreach and Communications at the Climate Registry, and I'm happy to introduce our next conversation, which focuses on the critical role that natural climate solutions play in meeting corporate commitments. We know that nature-based solutions are gaining traction as a key ingredient for addressing the climate crisis. Business leaders will share how exactly they're integrating nature-based solutions into their portfolio of reduction measures, some of the emerging trends they're observing, and the co-benefits of investing in these projects. We're dedicating time to answering your questions, so please use the chat function on the right side of your screen to ask away. With that, I'd like to introduce Stuart Lindsay, Managing Director, Corporate Engagement at the Nature Conservancy, who will facilitate our discussion. And with him, his fellow panelists, David Eichberg, Global Head of Climate Action at HP, Altera Hetzel, Vice President, Client Solutions at Natural Capital Partners, Andrea Smith, Sustainability Program Manager for UPS, and Natasha Tuck, Director of Sustainability and ESG for VMware. Welcome.
Delighted to be here and to moderate today's panel. We'll start by framing for just a couple of minutes the topic, then we'll dive into what will certainly be a vibrant conversation. We're all here because natural climate solutions are an important tool for tackling climate change, and they're a growing part of corporate climate strategies. This is a fast-moving space, with no doubt, and there's also some degree of uncertainty and challenge. Heading into COP, it's timely to unpack this topic with a panel of experts from leading organizations. My name is Stuart Lindsay. I'm the Managing Director of Corporate Engagement at the Nature Conservancy. We're a global environmental organization, and our conservationists, scientists, public policy experts, and other colleagues work to protect, restore, and manage the land and water on which all life depends. And by doing so, we strive to enhance biodiversity, reduce emissions, and benefit communities. We've been active in the NCS space for quite some time, both on the ground and working with other organizations on enabling conditions. So a couple of facts. The potential of NCS really can be expressed in a few statistics. A few years ago, TNC led some science that showed that about 20 NCS pathways, things like reforestation, ag and grassland practices, wetland restoration, could achieve about 30% of the cost-effective CO2 mitigation we need to do by 2030. One other statistic, nearly half of the high-impact climate solutions measured by Project Drawdown involve natural climate solutions. And one more, NCS projects represent a majority of potential new supply for global carbon markets, and this is according to the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets. So there's a lot of potential here. This is great for a variety of reasons, but in no small part because nature has been undervalued for far too long. And the consequences of this have been really nothing short of tragic. Scientists estimate that species extinction around the world is happening about 1,000 times faster than it would naturally. And deforestation and land use change, as we all know, contribute a significant amount of the emissions every year, about 10%. To look at this from another angle, the gap between what the world needs to spend to protect biodiversity and what it is spending is approximately $700 billion a year. So stronger engagement, new investment from the private sector in NCS, if done in the context of ambitious reductions, with an emphasis on credible science, on transparency, social benefits, community engagement, this could really be a powerful tool for change. And it could help us meet climate goals and do so much more. Now, the good news is that there's quite a bit of momentum in the private sector. Last I checked, 965 companies had made a 1.5 degree commitment via SBTi. We've seen a big jump in net zero commitments from the world's leading companies, and over 200 companies have signed the climate pledge. So we're seeing commitment, we're seeing investment in innovative projects, we're seeing engagement in standard setting, and we're seeing companies support science. We've noticed this at TNC, whether it's in the form of doing a new agroforestry project in Brazil with Amazon.com or creating new investment concepts with a variety of different partners. And I know we'll learn quite a bit more about new efforts via our panel today. Now, that's all good, but there's a long way to go. If you noticed the just released State of Climate Action Report, indicators on land use and coastal management are declared off track. And there are a lot of questions out there. Can we do enough high quality NCS projects? Can we do them in the world's most valuable and vulnerable ecosystems? Can we do them with communities who stand to benefit the most? Will standards and measurements be credible and practical enough to support real impact and also create a vibrant marketplace? Can we move quickly enough? Can we ensure that NCS represents a complement to ambitious reduction, not a substitute? We have a great panel to address these and a number of other questions. I'll kick it off. We'll ask a round of questions to the panel, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So please insert your questions if you haven't already into the system, and we'll try to take as many as we can. So let's start off. We'll ask a question for all of our panelists. Natasha, if we could start with you, and then we'll pass it to Andrea, to David, and to Altera. Each of your organizations has set long-term emissions target or is engaged in helping achieve such targets. In a couple of minutes, could you give us a snapshot of how your organizations are tackling climate and how NCS fits into your broader strategies?
Sure. Hi, happy to be here. So VMware started its carbon neutral journey in 2015, and we've been a certified carbon neutral company since 2018. We also procure 100% renewable energy for our operations. And last year we announced our goal for net zero by 2030 alongside our 2030 agenda. So from the start, our strategy has been to take action wherever we can and plan for the future. So with that in mind, I want to start with, reducing emissions internally. So certainly that's where we start. And we've been working hard to, with energy efficiency projects and the like across our real estate and our data centers. But for us, the biggest part of our footprint is our supply chain. So this year we launched a responsible sourcing program, and they're actually working with all of our suppliers on their science-based target journeys. So that's a bunch of work that we're doing internally. And of course it starts there. And with the commitment to net zero, we have created a 10-year model to the extent that we can forecast out emissions. We know there's no crystal ball, but we're looking at what our emissions could look like in 10 years. And with a hybrid strategy of carbon avoidance offsets and carbon removal offsets, planning on how to get to net zero. And over the last many years, we've participated in lots of carbon offset projects, given our carbon neutrality certification. But we are looking over the next few years to incrementally sort of give a heavier weighting, if you will, to the carbon removal projects, certainly those that are out there, and nature-based solutions in particular.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think take action wherever we can and plan for the future really is a great single sentence summary. That's fantastic. If we can hand it to Andrea.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. To my esteemed panelists, pleasure to be with you all today. Andrea Smith, UPS. UPS has a presence in 220 countries and territories. We operate a fleet of 125,000 ground vehicles, 500 planes. So for UPS, GHG emissions is among our most material sustainability issues. With that, we have a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. But just as under Natasha spoke to reducing emissions internally first, we understand that action must be taken today. So our focus is on decarbonization. To support that 2050 goal, we've set a short-term goal of by 2025 being 40% alternative fuel. And that is fuel that is from a source other than your conventional diesel and conventional gasoline. To support this goal, we also have an eye on electric vehicles, and electric vehicles will play a major role in UPS's sustainable fleet. And we have made agreements to support that, including a commitment to purchase up to 10,000 electric vehicles from Arrival, which is an EV manufacturer out of the UK. But also, we're supporting natural gas vehicles and have made investments in our natural gas fleet with an eye on fueling these natural gas vehicles with renewable natural gas. In the air, sustainable aviation fuel isn't yet scalable. So what we're doing in the meantime is we are and have been working on the efficiencies of our aircraft and ensuring that we are burning as less fuel as possible. So we believe that it's important to reduce before moving on to offsets. But once we've made those reductions, then that's where we bring in these natural capital solutions that we'll speak to today.
Great, thanks so much. Some really important wedges there that you're talking about in terms of transportation fuels. So look forward to hearing more. David.
Stuart, thank you. And thank you to C2ES, the Climate Registry, and Bloomberg Philanthropies for continuing to put on this great conference year after year, and the opportunity for HP to share and learn today as well. So at HP, of course, we recognize the urgency of the next decade to address climate change. And our climate action strategy focuses on 3 areas: carbon emissions, circularity, and forests. And in particular, that is to dramatically reduce GHG emissions in line with the latest climate science and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But in addition, we need to transform production and consumption from linear to circular models, and to address the depletion of natural resources and the emissions resulting from that. And thirdly, to protect and restore and sustainably manage forests to reverse the loss of biodiversity, ecosystem services, and to empower local and indigenous communities. And this past April, HP announced some of the tech industry's most aggressive and comprehensive climate action goals. And that included reducing our scope 1, 2, and 3 GHG emissions by 50% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2040. And very much like Andrea and Natasha have talked, the focus is on reductions first. The focus is on, again, our operations are a very, very small portion, but renewable energy, 100% renewable energy, electricity by 2025, all electric vehicles in our fleet by in HP's owned and operated fleet by 2030, and carbon neutrality in our own operations by 2025. But we need to drive this, as Natasha said, deep within the supply chain. It has to be across our product design. It has to be across how we drive service models to enable reuse as well as sustainable materials in product transportation and further on. But there's also this important element of forests, and we have a goal to eliminate or to counteract deforestation that's associated with both HP and non-HP brand paper that's used in HP products and print services by the end of the decade. Because at HP, our business is inextricably linked to forests through the paper that's used in our printers as well as packaging. And thriving working forests are maintained, are managed according to the principles of sustainability, are going to be essential to our business in the long term. And just this week, on Tuesday, HP announced an $80 million partnership expansion with the World Wildlife Fund to restore, protect, or improve the management of nearly 1 million acres of forest landscapes. That's about 5 times the size of New York City. And with this partnership, HP becomes one of the first technology companies to counteract the risks of deforestation beyond our own supply chain and accounting for the impact on nature of all paper that's used in our printers, regardless of the brand.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. It's really refreshing to hear that straight-on approach about deforestation. It's such a vital topic. Altera, could you finish us off with this first question?
Sure thing. So hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, and thanks for leading, Stuart. I'm Altera. I'm with Natural Capital Partners, but I should probably also say I'm with Climate Care because we recently merged together. Our combined company helps over 500 clients meet their corporate sustainability goals and take action on climate, including those on this panel, HP, VMware, and UPS. Often that is anchored in our carbon neutral certification or carbon neutrality today, but certainly as companies are thinking about what they need to do today, as well as what they want to do in the future, whether that's tracking toward net zero goals, forest positive goals, nature positive goals, offsets have a role to play, of course, after all these good reductions that we've been talking about have been planned and achieved. And in that space, it's kind of across the board. You know, Natasha mentioned removals, those reforestation and afforestation projects that are trapping carbon. But to David's point, we also need to protect the forests that are currently intact and ensure that we're taking conservation measures and avoid additional carbon emissions. So I'm just really excited to be sitting here with these great companies and great clients, and have done some really good work on the ground in forestry through improved forest management projects with the Nature Conservancy. So really happy to have you as well, Stuart.
Thanks so much, Altera. So I'll ask a couple questions now. We'll just direct them to one or two of you in the panel. We'll cover a couple different topics, then we'll open it up to the audience. Let's start with you, Andrea, and then we'll pass it to Natasha. We know that nature-based solutions do more than just remove carbon. They often have a significant number of co-benefits, and they're increasingly important for climate resilience. So how is UPS evaluating and tracking the co-benefits of the work it does in the NCS space?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. I spoke earlier to UPS's decarbonization for our own operations, but what we do offer in the offset space is an opportunity for our customers to offset their emissions produced through movements with UPS. Just as Natasha and David spoke to the supply chain, we understand that we are an important part of our customers' supply chain. So we'll partner with them in their carbon neutral goals to reduce their scope 3 emissions, or that with associated with purchase transportation. In this efforts, more and more companies are looking for projects around nature and carbon removals, in addition to aligning their projects with the SDGs. So there are co-benefits across all SDGs, not just the nature-based ones that we're speaking to today, but specifically we're seeing a market increase in those, or the requests for projects that are aligning with gender equality. So we're working with partners such as Natural Capital Partners on ensuring that our projects offer those co-benefits that are growing more and more among our customer requests.
That's very interesting. The demand signals that you're seeing out in the marketplace are important, and it'll be interesting to see how that tracks over the coming years. Natasha, how are you all looking at it?
Yeah, and first let me rewind a bit, because I realize I didn't give an intro to VMware. And I often say that VMware is the largest tech company that no one's heard of. So in case you're not familiar, we develop software. We're a multi-cloud company that enables our customers to use any app on any device from anywhere. And essentially you can think of us as the plumbing within just about everybody's, at this point, IT infrastructure. So that leads well into how I would respond to the co-benefits question, because from the start, they've been an important part of our journey. So because we can relate to being that plumbing or that foundation, we have always invested in projects that have those multiple co-benefits, because we think that by laying that foundation in communities, that it really enables those communities to be strong and resilient and to thrive. So whether it's eliminating the need for additional wood to be cut down as a result of a smart water filter, to economic development through training local folks and communities to deploy clean cook stoves or do leak detection, these are all co-benefits that have a huge impact. And we also, like Andrea said, we align ours to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also talk about those co-benefits when we talk about the projects.
Great, thank you very much. Great contributions. So we've heard quite a bit about how NCS is embedded into these strategies, the importance it has, but this is not a space without some challenge. So perhaps we could unpack that a little bit. Altera, from your vantage point, what do you see as the biggest challenges to scaling up NCS, and what headwinds are you seeing out there in the market?
Yeah, I mean, if I was just going to like put it simply and bluntly, we need money and time. As we're thinking about developing natural capital solutions or nature-based solutions, we have a considerable supply and demand issue going on. With all of these commitments coming out, we need to make sure that the projects are in place to meet the demand of the future now, 2030 and beyond. In terms of money, quite frankly, we need money to get seedlings, to get trees into the ground, to make sure that they're monitored and they have a high survival rate, to do that important community engagement work and stakeholder engagement work that needs to happen on the ground to ensure that the local communities are good stewards of these projects. And then, you know, and this is literally not rocket science, but it takes time for trees to grow. And so there's going to be a little bit of a delay when the capital needs to be injected into the market to when those projects are actually delivering outcomes in terms of carbon sequestration. So I know it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a different market, at least from the offset perspective, than what we've seen before, where credits are just issued and kind of spot purchased. There's probably going to need to be more of a three-pronged approach where companies are looking to purchase those credits that are on the market today, maybe looking to secure forward strips of those credits for future issuances in the coming years, but then also injecting capital into project development and project expansion to ensure that those inventories are going to be available to draw from in 2030, 2040, and 2050 to meet all these awesome goals.
Or money and time, David. Does that sound right to you? Would you add anything to Altera's comments?
Well, time is not on our side here, right? But I guess I'd add to Altera. I agree. It's a there's a quantity and there's a quality issue, right? So alongside the old adage that you manage what you measure is one that not everything that matters can be measured, certainly not easily, right? And this is often the case with natural climate or nature-based solutions, given the vast range of factors that are involved in natural systems. Even to quantify a ton of carbon sequestered in a given forest area can be somewhat tenuous, and hence the need for rigorous and high quality standards. It's not rocket science, but it is forestry science. So HP and WWF, now with this new partnership, we're setting a new bar for nature-based solutions that are going to benefit nature, climate, and people, with this partnership providing a much needed credible counterpoint to criticism that's focused on certain nature-based solutions that lack rigorous methodologies or social safeguards. And so we're recognizing that challenge at the start of the project. Together with WWF, we'll be using a rigorous science-based methodology in both the design and the implementation to estimate forest footprints and on-the-ground approaches to calculate carbon and other nature benefits through our investment. This is a methodology that is one that WWF developed through our work in identifying science-based targets for forests to estimate that impact on nature from the sourcing of land-based commodities, like hardwood, of course. And HP will be the first company to rigorously now apply this methodology, and the models that are developed with this will help to identify key regions of the world for forest conservation and then better estimate carbon and nature benefits from forest actions. So we're helping to advance this movement to really ensure that nature-based solutions are informed by the best available science and protecting co-benefits that forest ecosystems provide to people and plants and animals.
So that's really fascinating, and I love your comment. Not everything that matters can be measured. Certainly, not everything that matters can be measured affordably today either. So, if you're working on methodological innovation, stick with this just for a second and tell us more about what other innovative areas you think are the most exciting or have the most potential, and then we'll ask the same question of Natasha.
So, I think it's really in this area I mentioned before, forging ahead, beyond one's own boundary and one's own supply chain. HP was one of the few companies in the world to achieve a zero deforestation goal for the sourcing of our own paper and packaging. And last year we achieved We achieved that for 99% of HP brand paper and paper-based packaging, with the remaining 1% being assessed to ensure that the reported fiber usage would meet our sustainable paper and wood policy. And then, as I mentioned earlier this year, we set a goal now to counteract deforestation for non-HP paper that's used in our products and print services by the end of the decade. And then the announcement on Tuesday of this $80 million partnership with WWF to restore and protect and improve that management of 1 million acres of forest landscapes. That's about 4,000 square miles. And this partnership then is, it's going to counterbalance to the level of 17 million metric tons of paper that's used in both the commercial and consumer HP printers over the next 10 years. And that's going to allow us to make progress against this goal of that, regardless of paper brand, that we're counterbalancing the impact on forest resources, and will help us to realize a vision for forest positive printing. It's a pledge to give back to forests more than we take. So, we'll be one of the first technology companies to counteract the risk of deforestation beyond the supply chain and raise the bar on corporate leadership for nature-based solutions as a first company, as I mentioned, to pilot science-based targets for forests. And I think that's the area where companies really need to step up. It's in applying the best science, working collaboratively, and looking to address impacts simply beyond their own value chains when they recognize the transformative opportunities that we have to work across industries and drive success faster.
Thanks so much. Natasha, I'll just pass it straight to you on the innovation side. What are you seeing about with potential in the next few years?
Well, so first I want to say congratulations, Dave. That's a super exciting project. I was impressed when I saw that announcement. And my answer might surprise you, but at VMware, we always talk about trees as being our favorite technology and being the operating system for this planet that we live on. So we're super excited right now about mangroves and mangrove projects. So I don't know if you know, but these are called the Wonder Tree. And that's because they store 4 times the amount of carbon. They also have multiple co-benefits, such as providing coastal protection, supporting aquatic life. The list goes on. So as part of our commitment to getting trees in the ground, we recently announced our partnership with 1t.org and committed to planting and protecting, to Altera's point, 1 million trees by 2030. So we're focused again on getting them in the ground now as a way to take meaningful action today. And then our hope is that those will become blue carbon projects where we can potentially see them as carbon removal offsets in the future.
That's excellent. Mangroves are truly the wonder tree. I think the science I've seen recently said about 20% of the world's mangrove forests could be funded through carbon finance. So there's a lot of interesting potential there. Some more work to do, but it's great to hear. It's great to hear that focus. Let's shift gears just a second, and Altera, if I could ask you, just in terms of, there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of challenges out there, there's a lot of gaps we need to fill. But if you could flip a switch and change one thing today that could benefit the expansion of credible, high quality NCS projects or expand the marketplace, what would you do?
Well, I take what Lisa Jackson said to heart at the end of her comments, which is that if I could flip a switch, we would be a fossil fuel-free economy. We would have a renewable energy grid. We would have electrified transportation and fleets. We wouldn't be depending so much on nature to look to do all the hard work of solving climate change for us. So, reducing first, I'm just going to continue to emphasize that. But in terms of literally, if I could just flip a switch and have a dream come true, it would probably be in the insurance space and not in their own reductions. But I'm watching this space closely because, Stuart, the Nature Conservancy and Swiss Re has had some successes in actually insuring natural capital off of the Yucatan Peninsula. In this case, it was coral reefs. But I would like to see that applied to forestry and removals, similar to how we insure our homes. And because everybody is insuring their homes, we're spreading the risk, we're making it affordable, and we can take action if anything goes wrong with our house. We can apply those same principles to forestry projects. Of course, we're seeing the effects of climate change. In addition to the effects of human consumption, but the effects of climate change are impacting forestry projects, whether it's severe weather events or wildfires. And so it might be a big switch to flip, but it's certainly something I'm watching. I know that the industry is talking about it a lot. I know it's had some successes, and I would love to see it scale so that corporations and everybody feels like they're kind of de-risking their investments a little bit by all participating in the same insurance plans for natural capital solutions.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have a switch they could like to flip? Altera covered a lot of ground there, but maybe there's any other things anyone want to mention?
Sure, Stuart, I'm happy to share a couple of thoughts. So certainly agree in the sense that I think in the broader picture, 100%, renewable electricity and energy sources around the world is really what's going to be needed, particularly when we think about the need to decarbonize our entire upstream and our entire downstream when it comes to using, manufactured electronic products. But I think a little more specific, I guess I'd say to looking at the area of natural climate solutions would be, with hopes of what we have coming up next week at COP, it would really be that we see as a result, determination of rules and guidance around how we're going to operationalize Article 6. And then by that, advance international carbon market mechanisms. That is going to help to improve the quantity and the quality. It's going to remove uncertainty. It's going to allow governments and other players to be much more active and proactive and supportive in the financing and implementation. And it will, start to really operationalize a lot of what's already been set out through COP in mechanisms like RED+. So right now, I think it's really that there's a lot of lack of transparent and well-functioning markets that's impeding investment, and that then is going to impact the development of that market. And so we're in a not a great loop right now. And if we can begin to get the clarity around those, the kind of rules and guidance, that's a huge step forward in my mind.
Great. Thank you all. Let's turn it to the audience Q&A. We had some questions come in already, and I will work these through and toss them to one of you. But everybody, please feel free to chime in at any moment. The first question, Altera, I'll send it back to you if you don't mind. How can developers better characterize the co-benefits produced by their NCS project? So could you talk a little bit more about the co-benefit side of things?
Sure. Well, we've heard, a couple of the panelists talk about Sdg alignment. That's certainly one way that, we create those storylines through from carbon down to other co-benefits. But we also see standards solving for this as well. There's the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's not just measuring climate, it's community and biodiversity benefits. SD Vista, which is actually verifying 2 sustainable development goals. Standards out there like social carbon or even W+, to Andrea's point, which would measure gender equality and women's empowerment. The gold standard, kind of embedded within its methodology and protocols, aligns with the sustainable development goals. These projects are doing so much more than just trapping carbon, whether it's filtering water for downstream communities, providing critical habitat, open space and recreation. I think after a year of lockdown, everybody is appreciating nature a whole heck of a lot and getting out there and taking a walk in the woods. So, more and more we're finding that not just our companies kind of looking for it, asking for it, demanding it, but on the flip side, figuring out ways that we can actually measure, to David's point, what those benefits are in a real way. And I hope that out of COP, we see even more standards kind of come out and make announcements, particularly around biodiversity, which is one of the tougher nuts to crack, so that we can measure those outcomes as well. And all of it together, when you look at nature and the full kind of ecosystem services that nature is providing, the value is so much higher than just the price per ton. I think then we start to really get to the true cost and the true value of these projects.
Yeah,
And
value.
I'll add, sorry.
No, go for it.
In speaking with these standards, we've worked with Natural Capital Partners on one particular project, Darkwoods. We've worked with them since 2018, and we're super excited when Darkwoods, which is a forest improvement or forest management improvement project out of Canada, became the first project in North America to be certified with this SD Vista. So very exciting there. And SD Vista, like Altera spoke to, it's really just a framework by which projects can be assessed on their sustainable development benefits and how they contribute to the achievement of these sustainable development goals. And specific to Darkwoods, we hit several of the goals to include clean water and sanitation, climate action, life on land. But I also want to add ACRI, which is a new project for us, and it's out of the Amazon. So ACRI is the westernmost state in Brazil and is 95% forested. So if we continue at the current rates of deforestation in this area of Brazil, that 90% goes down to 65% by 2030. So an awesome opportunity to get in on a project that is a forest conservation project. But not only that, ACRI offers alignment with 15 of the Sustainable Development Goals. A couple of highlights include zero hunger, where the local farmers have been able to increase the yield of their crops. Crops local to the area include corn, chickpeas. They're also rearing organic pigs. So some exciting opportunities there as far as food sources, but then good health and well-being, where this project in particular has supported the facilitation of doctors' visits and refurbishing 4 of their local clinics there. So again, we speak to the co-benefits of these projects and just an awesome opportunity to touch upon several of these SDGs.
So open space, community benefits, including medical care, increased ag productivity. I think these are great examples of the multitude of different co-benefits that can exist from some of these projects. We've had a couple of questions just about, well, what about, and we talked a little bit about it on the mangrove front, and Altera, you mentioned reefs, but people are still interested in the audience about things beyond forestry. That's been kind of a theme. One of the questions actually has to do with seaweed, and maybe I'll just take that because TNC's been doing some work on the seaweed front and integrating seaweed into restorative aquaculture projects. There's a lot of science and practical exploration yet to do on this, but it's a super interesting area, and there actually are some climate benefits to seaweed when grown the right way, including marine sediment sequestration, a buffer against ocean acidification, which can have a real benefit to coastal communities. And seaweed can be a product that replaces other products. So think about an ingredient in animal feed, think about an ingredient for bioplastics, some kinds of fiber products as well, and can also be a soil stimulant, an improver for soil quality, which then has an added effect about sequestration. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with seaweed. There is some interesting potential there. There's just some additional work and exploration to do. Does anybody else have another example of something beyond forestry that they'd like to highlight?
I'm really excited to see the standards come up with methodologies for seaweed. I'm really excited to see the methodologies kind of evolve for blue carbon that Natasha mentioned and get those projects to scale. Soil carbon has so much potential if, to David's point, we can figure out, the best way to measure it and calculate it. But agree, nature has so many solutions for us beyond just forests if we could figure out a way to harness it and get some forest science in there.
So we've talked a lot about the benefits and the work being done, but we'd be remiss not to mention that there is some skepticism of nature-based solutions and projects, that it could be a form of greenwashing, that it actually enables one to avoid doing the hard work. And everybody on the panel has mentioned very explicitly the need and the hard work that's being done by your companies today on reductions. But would anyone like to talk a little bit about some of the challenges from a public perception standpoint that projects like this have?
Sure, Stuart. I'm happy to throw down maybe a little bit first, but definitely curious to hear the perspectives of others. And I think it was Natasha and Andrea spoke to this at the start when they were talking about these are the commitments that the company has made for real reductions. These are the actions. This is the progress. I mean, that's at the core, is to be sure that there is transparency and then there's clear communication around making commitments and taking real action to make these reductions now, to set reduction targets in line with science, to show other complementary commitments that are demonstrating the strategies behind realizing those reductions, and then using whether again they're going to be tech-based or nature-based types of currently largely compensation, but even removal, that's happening, that's complementing that other work, and whether that's happening now in order to address and achieve carbon neutrality, as Natasha was talking about, that the VMware has done now for many years, or whether that's part of the strategy, and how that's part of the strategy down the road. I think it's really fully in that transparency. I'm reminded of a few weeks ago, it was actually Natural Capital Partners that put out I think it was the third of a number of studies looking at the Fortune 500 and what is the nature of commitments. And so I'm going a little bit off of memory, but one of the things, and essentially for those that didn't see it, it was classifying and giving a little bit of, I think, quality too around the nature of a number of commitments, whether that had more historically been carbon neutrality, signing up for science-based targets, committing to RE100, and then most recently it was net zero commitments. And a couple of things I took away was, well, there was this interesting sort of piece that Natural Capital did about, well, did those net zero commitments really, were they particularly ambitious, right? Was it clear the scope that was being put down for net zero? And how did that compare to the countries in which those countries are headquartered? So did they seem particularly leading, or were they sort of kind of great in the middle, or were they a little bit behind? But the other thing that struck me was, I was surprised that while net zero was accelerating, shouldn't we also be seeing an acceleration in commitment to science-based targets and into RE100? I mean, those are the vehicles to get there. So those really should be an integral part of the strategy in setting and realizing net zero.
Thanks, David. That's really helpful. Natasha, please.
Yeah, I'll just add to all the great stuff that Dave just mentioned, but I'll say that this is a conversation that I've had for years, where people question when you're buying your way out, or purchasing carbon offsets or RECs. And I think so much of it is, well, one thing that we've done first is the third-party certification, right? So I feel very supported by Natural Capital Partners and through the Carbon Neutral Protocol to be a certified carbon neutral company with a protocol that is transparent and public, and then to work with Natural Capital Partners and other partners who we trust, who only surface up projects that are third-party verified, really credible standards, et cetera. So I think the challenge is that when you get into explaining how this works, it gets so technical so quickly, and it's easy to lose people. So I think coming up with in fact, someone recently said that simple is extraordinarily hard. And if you find yourself explaining yourself, you've already lost the person or the conversation, which is often where I find myself, right? Trying to explain. So anyway, I just think there's a lot of education to be done and awareness that would really support this work, because when we do let people know what's happening, for example, we actually had Altera do a webinar recently at VMware, where we thought, let's highlight our projects. Let's talk about it, because when people hear about the actual projects, they get super excited. We had almost 1,000 people on the webinar. I mean, it was record numbers, and I've never had so much positive feedback and so many people so proud of the work we're doing. And yet most often we treat it like a transaction, right? We're just buying the carbon offsets to get our carbon neutral claim. And we don't have the time to do the storytelling and the legitimate storytelling and the sharing of all of these co-benefits, which I'm also so appreciating this conversation around co-benefits, because I feel like those are the unsung heroes. And if people understood like the true impact, the holistic impact of all of these projects, that they would certainly be more interested and also maybe even think they're cheap, dare I say.
Andrea, please.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and Stuart, you spoke to this in your intro, to offer additional points on top of David and Natasha's outstanding points, is that this is complementary. So these are efforts that are going alongside our efforts to decarbonize, as we are looking, as UPS, a transportation company, to electrify our fleet, as we are looking at gaining more sustainable aviation fuel. Our customers are looking for commitments to come alongside those commitments. So offsets and natural capital solutions offer an opportunity to complement the decarbonization work that our companies are already doing.
It's an excellent point. All three of you making extremely important comments. Natasha, you just said something I think leads into another question from the audience, which is simple is extraordinarily hard. The simple concept that these projects should have benefits to the communities. Andrea mentioned some in Acre in Brazil. That can be hard work, right? On the ground, negotiating the structure of these types of projects, the ownership rights, et cetera. Can anyone on the panel talk a little bit about what have been some of the challenges in doing that, and perhaps some advice for a good way to approach it, either practically or conceptually?
Sure, I'll take first stab. I think that the community and stakeholder engagement, which is kind of always happening at the onset of the projects, is absolutely critical to building local capacity, to getting local buy-in, to ensuring that the activities aren't just shifted somewhere else. That's called leakage. That means that folks like us have to work closely with on-the-ground implementation partners. It's not natural capital partners going into a space and saying, we've got a project for you, sign here. It's those local groups that are engaging the community and kind of making sure that you're bringing the community along the way, that they're benefiting from it. And that filters down into the co-benefits that we've been talking about, but it's critical to the success of the project so that the communities really take ownership of it. I'll just kind of say, hold your ears, tech people, that I do have a little bit of a concern when we talk about the potential of tech solutions for monitoring natural capital projects or nature-based solutions projects, because we've just removed that people component. I would say that those tech solutions for monitoring, if it's remote sensing, if it's satellite images or anything like that, it has to complement the engagement on the ground. It has to complement the on-the-ground measurements and the hard work that the community is doing, and not replace it. Otherwise, we've just traded one problem for another, frankly.
I think one of the things I hear frequently from my colleagues in TNC is the value of the patient investment that can be made on the ground in places that matter, places that are high on the list that we should conserve or work in these situations. And that takes that energy and that concept that you're talking about, Altera. Does anyone else have any advice for those listening about how to get involved with communities, how to bring them into these types of projects?
Well, for our experience, I would really only, at risk of echoing what Altera said, it's been through having the best NGO partners we can find in order to help achieve that on-the-ground engagement and empowerment of local NGOs, local communities. And while Andrea was talking about work in Accra, we've been with WWF Again, we've been doing work in the Atlantic forest in Brazil, and there again, putting forward first the need to be sure that we're partnering through local and regional partners to ensure that those communities are engaged and benefiting from the restoration that's happening. It's just essential to be sure that we're prioritizing listening to communities, ensuring social safeguards, and bringing about community benefits.
Thank you, David. We have another question that's just a little bit more on the factual side, and it is, what's the delta between what's currently being invested and what should be invested in NCS solutions? I think I've seen a statistics that the market needs to increase by, the supply side and 15 times what it currently is. But Altera, you may have a better stat or two that shows the scale of what needs to be done.
No, I think you're spot on, Stuart. I mean, that 15 times, that's a big task from where we are today. And so, and I'm just to be soapbox for a second, that is not just in planting trees and getting those removals for the future. That's ensuring that we have intact forests, that we're supporting organizations like the Nature Conservancy to get easements onto properties, to make sure that they're protected in perpetuity, to make sure that we have a forest supply chain for our built environment, to make sure that we have pulp and paper and fiber that we need for our supply chains. So the investment is well beyond just carbon. It really is that people, planet, profit, triple bottom line that we're talking about with Natural Capital Solutions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Does anyone there's one more question from the audience that I think we could just come back to, which is kind of, we were talking quite a bit about biodiversity, but are there any additional comments or any additional thoughts folks have about how companies, what would make it easier and facilitate greater corporate involvement, private sector investment in biodiversity protection? Is there anybody have any last thoughts about that?
Just do it. All of those stats that you mentioned at the opening, Stuart, we have species going extinct at an absolutely ridiculous rate. The whole reason that I got into this space, in addition to having wonderful children, where I realized I needed to look at them and say, I knew there was a problem. I did everything I could to solve it. My background was from a deep love for wildlife. And the more we kind of lose that connection to wildlife, the more we lose our connection to nature, the more we lose our connection to these large-scale environmental challenges that we have. So the more that we can protect, biodiversity hotspots, protect existing native forests, so that we don't have to replant them. And then I'll add, again, a little bit on the soapbox, but making sure that we also have working forests that are sustainably managed, so that our dependency on these wood-based products has a supply source, and keeps us from going and deforesting other places that are critical habitat for biodiversity. So just do it. You can wait for the standard to come out. You can buy a metric ton if that's what you want to do. You can plant trees, but we need this yesterday.
Yeah, it's work. Oh, go ahead, David.
Well, Stuart, I was going to say, I think that when we're thinking about companies, I think Andrea put her finger on it earlier when she talked about stories. And I think I found that, often when companies talking about carbon emissions reductions and I think it was, maybe it was Andrea too who said, getting lost in the complexity of science-based targets. It's when you can look at these projects and you can look at the impact on communities and on wildlife. And here we're talking about biodiversity, but what does that mean? What does that really look like on the ground? That becomes powerful storytelling to brands. That becomes the way to engage with their customers, especially consumers, and help the consumers through their actions to make choices that are contributing to natural climate solutions.
Yeah.
Natasha, please.
I'll just add, the advantage of nature-based solutions and trees is that they're super tangible. So to what Dave was just saying, like people can really get their heads around what this looks like and the value of it. I think you're also just making me think of this sort of mindset shift that has been happening and needs to happen, which is around uncertainty and not knowing the perfect solution or not knowing how we're going to get there. So for me, it was a great exercise when we developed our science-based targets, where we had to tell our executives to sign off on a science-based target that we actually didn't know how we were going to achieve. And actually that we couldn't do it by ourselves, but we were going to count on other industries and other players to partake. So I think that's part of it too. So yeah, what Altera said about just do it. And for us, it's about taking action now and doing what you can.
Thank you very much. You know, I think it's also worth mentioning the biodiversity negotiations that are going on this year and into next year in Kunming, and the potential that lies there. And it's great to see more companies getting engaged in that by different consortia and different platforms. So that's something. I mean, the amount of public funding and the amount of policy change that can be had when it comes to accomplishing conservation, the 30% target, et cetera, is really profound. And the private sector has an important voice there. This has been a really fantastic discussion. We're almost out of time. And so I thought at the end we could just turn it back to each of you and ask the very simple question of, is there anything that you didn't say that you wanted to say, or anything that you'd like to leave the audience with as we wrap up? David, I'll just go clockwise around my screen. I'll start with you.
Well, one of the things that's going to stick with me, I think, is when Natasha used that phrase of "simple is extraordinarily hard." But I don't know, that's a good thought to have. But maybe in that vein, and what I've heard folks say is, I'd say that as companies and as a global community, we need to focus on what we need to do today that will set us up for success and yield the results required in 10 and 20 years' time. And natural climate solutions are projects that take that kind of time. I mean, so is decarbonizing the supply chain. So is shifting business models to be more sustainable. So my final thought is, take the long view, start the journey today. There's no time to lose.
Altera.
I'll just take my 30 seconds to say thank you. Climate Leadership Conference did a great job from pivoting from in-person to online. So thanks for that shift. Stuart, to you and the Nature Conservancy for all the hard work that your organization is doing on the ground and for moderating the planet. Dave, Natasha, Andrea, some of the best clients ever, really taking a leadership role in this space. And of course, I don't know if she's still watching, but thanks to Lisa Jackson for kicking us off.
Andrea.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to steal Altera's Just Do It. So wherever you are in your sustainability journey, maybe you aren't among the corporate commitments of an Apple, HP, VMware, UPS, but wherever you are in your journey, just do it. Every drop in the water helps.
Natasha.
I'll also say thank you. What a delight to spend this hour with all of you. And I have to attribute that quote to our new CTO, Kit Colbert. He said that recently in a meeting and it really stuck with me. But I've already said it in different ways, but let's not let perfection be the enemy of progress. So there's always uncertainty, but there is action that we can take now, and it'll support us toward a more sustainable, equitable, and secure future.
So take the long view, act, make progress, act. That's the key messages I got from that wrap up. And I hope everyone watching today has gleaned a number of useful takeaways and good information from this panel. I know I certainly did. I'd like to thank each of you for your participation and the really succinct and great comments that you made. And we'll turn it back over to the organizers. And thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you so much, Stuart, Altera, David, Andrea, and Natasha for an engaging discussion. Really appreciate it. I learned a lot today, and I hope all of you did too. As we wrap for the day, I'd like to thank a few more sponsors for their support. Silver sponsors WSP, Edison International, Train Technologies, the Nature Conservancy, DTE, Volvo Group, and PSEG, and to our climate impact sponsor, Natural Capital Partners. To those in the audience, thank you very much for joining us. We hope to see you in a few weeks as the Climate Leadership Series continues. Our next two sessions are November 17th with a workshop on climate risk, opportunity, and disclosure. And November 18th, we'll host a conversation on transforming the built environment through smart technology and innovation. And to those attending COP, safe travels. We look forward to connecting with you all next month.